All right, if we can get everybody to have your seats, we'll get going again. State Representative for Price is a fourth-generation Texan born and raised in the Panhandle. Price serves the people of Carson, Hutchinson, Moore, Potter, and Sherman counties. He is in his third term in the Texas House of Representatives. Representative Price serves on the House Appropriations Committee, which is responsible for shaping the state's balanced budget. He is chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on the Health and Human Services portion of the state budget. Price is also chairman of the House Select Committee on Mental Health. Also, Price and Senator Jane Nelson serve as co-chairs on the Health and Human Services Commission Transition Legislative Oversight Committee. Regarding water policy, Representative Price has authored and passed legislation pertaining to groundwater districts. Price also joint authored the 2013 historic water legislation known as House Bill 4, which called for the creation of the State Water Implementation Fund for Texas, otherwise known as SWIFT, and was subsequently approved by over 70% of Texas voters during the 2013 constitutional amendment election. Representative Price is a member of the Community College Caucus, Rural Caucus, and Veterans Caucus. One of Price's favorite quotes is from President Ronald Reagan, who said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended by each generation." Representative for Price.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. It's really an honor to be here. This is the third time that I've had the privilege of speaking to this group, and I guess there's only been 3 symposiums, so I'm always happy to be invited back to participate. That's a great thing that the Panhandle Groundwater Conservation District does here, so I want to thank CE and his staff. They always do a good job, and the turnout, as you can see, is always wonderful for this event. I think they have good speakers and good topics to be discussed, and so I really, my hat's off to them, and I thank them for the invitation to come back. They asked me to spend 10 to 15 minutes with you today to talk about interim charges and what to expect in the 85th legislative session, which sounds like it's a long way away, but it's not. We're 10 months away from the next legislative session starting in January of 2017, and so you may be thinking, one, what are interim charges and why are they important? So one thing I want to do is just take a couple of minutes to tell you, one, what interim charges are, 2, why I think they're important, and 3, why it's a good idea to pay attention to them. Now, most people know that the Texas Legislature meets every other year for 140 days. So the legislature kicks off in early January of odd-numbered years. So the next legislative session will start, as I mentioned, in January 2017. So what do you do between the end of a legislative session and the beginning of the next one? Well, that's the period that's most commonly referred to as the interim period. And so what is undertaken then are studies of issues, draft legislation is undertaken, and committees meet to really address topics that both House and Senate leadership think are important. So interim charges play a vital role in that process. So what happens is at the end of every session, so in our case, at the end of last session, last summer, last June, both the leadership in the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the Texas House, and the Lieutenant Governor who leads the Senate chamber will take input from members as to what should be prioritized and what should be studied during that year to year and a half period of time when the legislature is not in session. Now often these suggestions come in topical areas from the committees that meet on those areas. So for instance, Natural Resource Committee members will frequently say, I want to study, or I want the committee to study and evaluate issues related, for instance, to groundwater ownership, or whatever topic they think is important and might need to be addressed more thoroughly in the next session. So that happens, and so in that sense, it's kind of like water planning. It's a ground-up process because members consider what they want to emphasize in the next session and what they want to study during the interim. They give those suggestions to the Speaker and to the Lieutenant Governor, and then ultimately the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor issue these directives or interim charges. And those charges then set the framework for what the committees will do for the interim period, that year to year and a half time frame. And so that's where we are right now. That's what we're in the middle of. We're in this interim period where committees have received their charges, and they're starting to meet and evaluate what the issues will be and why they're important. So the second thing I wanted to tell you, instead of just what they are, is why are they important? Well, they're important to you, and if you're interested in water policy and all aspects of it, in our neck of the woods, we're very concerned with groundwater. But if you go down to the coast, they're obviously, or East Texas, is going to be more interested in surface water. Or if you go to different areas of the state, there's a combination of surface water and groundwater. So some areas are more arid than others, and Texas is a big place. So we've got different constituencies all across the state who are interested in policy, and many of you are in this room today. So I think I can give you an idea based on what the House recommended and what the Senate recommended as to what these interim charges will look like and what that will lead to in January. The House has basically 9 House interim charges that involve water and water policy. The Senate has 4, and you heard Senator Perry this morning. I'm sure he mentioned a few of those or what his committee is going to be dealing with. But listen to these interim charges. I'm going to read some of the high points because I think that it will give you at least a glimpse into what we can expect to see by way of draft legislation that the 85th Legislature will take up when the House and the Senate convene next year. The first was to examine the regional and state water planning processes with emphasis on the following, or to include the integration of HB4, which I know you've talked about already today, the structure and operation of regional planning groups, whether the drought of record remains the appropriate benchmark for planning, any impediments to meeting the conservation, agricultural, and rural project goals set by HB4 in the 83rd legislative session, and possible new approaches to meet these goals. These are really important in and of itself. All of those elements, every single one of those that I just read, I bet somebody in this room has some aspect of their industry or their profession or their livelihood that is affected by what policy will be established by some of those issues. And so the point I want to make there is you may think that it's not important as to what the House or the Senate does with their committees this interim, but it absolutely is, because that will be the basis or the springboard through which new draft bills will be undertaken and studied in the next session. So if I were you and I wanted to participate, not just monitor what was going on, find out when those committees will set those issues for hearing. You will have the opportunity to participate either by submitting written testimony, by calling my office or your representative's office or your senator's office and saying, this issue is important to me, or it's dangerous, or it's really good, and here's why. Because that information can be taken to those hearings, or you can travel to Austin and testify. That's the type of feedback that those committees are going to want to have, because they will be drafting legislation and making decisions based on the body of knowledge that they develop over the course of the next 10 months on these issues. The second was to evaluate the status of water markets. The third was to analyze the factors contributing to freshwater loss in the state of Texas, including evaporation, excess flows into the Gulf of Mexico, and infrastructure inefficiencies. Up in this neck of the woods, of course, infrastructure and what we have in place, especially in municipal water use, very important to us. Agricultural use, obviously very important to our economy. Evaporation in reservoirs across the state, it was amazing to me, and I'm sure you've heard this if you attended the symposium last year, or the last biennial symposium after the 2011 drought of record. It was amazing to me how much we lost to evaporation. When we had high oppressive heat coupled with the drought, the amount of water that was lost through evaporation was staggering. So when you saw more water, for instance, in the Highland Lake area in and around the state capitol lost through evaporation than the city of Austin even used, that kind of puts it in perspective, and I'm sure that was happening all across the state. The fourth was to evaluate the progress of seawater desalination near projects on the Texas coast and examine the viability of public-private partnerships in which the state might facilitate more of those projects. Obviously, the technology is there both for the desalination of brackish water as well as seawater. It's very expensive, but the state wants to evaluate ways to make it more economical so that we can have other and additional ways to develop more water. The fifth was to monitor the use of the funds made available to our state in relation to the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill. That'll constantly be evaluated, I'm certain. Next, to evaluate the status of legislation to encourage joint groundwater planning, including HB 200, and monitor ongoing legal developments concerning ownership and access to groundwater. I thought it was interesting in that respect. Many of you might know this, but there was a major case that was decided just a few days ago, last Friday, in the Supreme Court. You may have heard about this earlier today, but in case you didn't, I just bring to your attention, this was really, I think, a win for farmers and ranchers and private property rights advocates in the state of Texas, and kind of a loss for what I would call, more municipal-oriented users or cities across the state. The Supreme Court on Friday handed a victory to farmers, ranchers, and other longstanding water rights owners by declining to take up a Brazos River case with widespread implications for future water battles in our state. They denied a petition for review, which means they weren't going to hear the case, so the lower court's opinion stands, and that left in place their ruling that said Texas cannot give special treatment to cities or power generators over more senior water right holders on these rivers, even if the state declares it necessary to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So what that means is they can't give special preferential treatment over and above the landowners, the farmers, the ranchers that might have junior rights. So I thought that was a very interesting case, and one that I think we'll see more and more, or at least issues like that, as the state grows, our population grows, and we will see ag use, municipal use, and industrial use all tugging at one another for these limited resources. The seventh was determine the sources of water used by Texans in the production of food and fiber. That was a suggestion that my office made and some others did too, so I was glad to see this on the charge, and the House will study that issue jointly with the House Committee on Agriculture and Livestock. So if you're interested in that issue, please pay attention to when that hearing might be scheduled. And if you have any questions specifically about that, let me know. And then eighth was determine if sufficient safety standards exist to protect groundwater contamination from disposal and injection wells. That's a joint charge with the House Energy Committee, so there will be a lot of attention, especially given the status of the industries, the petroleum industry in the state of Texas, and the demand for water as well, and some of the studies that have been undertaken over the past 4 years. I think we'll hear a lot more about that. And then finally, conduct oversight and monitoring of these agencies under programs within the committee's jurisdiction, consider reforms, opportunities to streamline programs, and review surface water permitting processes across the state. So those are what the House will study. Now the Senate had 4 others. I'm not going to read through them, but very similar. Some of them were broader in that it got into the interplay between state law and federal law, and some federal overreaches and programs and laws that are affecting the ownership of water across the state. Their planning processes, and they already had one hearing on water litter regarding windblown and waterborne litter in our state's waterways. And so the process is already underway, and I mention it because what can we really glean from this and what can we take away? I think you can take away a few things. One is you need to understand what these mean in terms of reading tea leaves. All these charges will be studied, there will be hearings, there will be a lot of attention to these issues given over the course of the year, and what that means is members on those committees will then take the charge to develop draft bills, or others may do it on their own, but certainly these will be prioritized in the legislative agenda of all these committee members. And so if any of these topics are of particular concern to you, again, I urge you to participate. There's plenty of opportunities to do that, or contact our office or any of the members that represent this area, and I'm sure they'd be happy to work with you and find out ways that we can get our opinions expressed and positions made known. The development of water and the oversight or permitting and planning processes really touched and affect almost all 9 of the House issues. So I think we'll see a lot of emphasis on that, and going forward, the House Natural Resource Committee will take a lot of time to study all of those. The continued demand on water is high, and based on our state's demographers' population studies, and we've mentioned this over and over again in symposiums in the past, but also recently, because that trend is not slowing down. So by the year 2050, if the state's demographers are right and we double our population, and we have a population in excess of 53 or 54 million Texans, that's pretty staggering when it comes to the demand just from a population standpoint, but the businesses that relocate here and the industry that'll be focused here and what will be needed to support that population here all will create a high demand. And so given a strong economy and a high demand, there will be a lot of stresses on our water resources. Texas had 8 of the 15 most rapidly growing cities between the census day and a snapshot in time about a year later. So we don't have more recent data than that, but what that indicates, and I don't think the trends change because over the past several years, the state of Texas has created more jobs and has brought more people into the state than all other 49 states combined. So what we're seeing is tremendous attraction to the state of Texas, and I think that what we're seeing is most of those people are locating in and around metropolitan areas and suburban areas surrounding cities. And so that sticks with a trend that's across our entire country. Although it contains less than a quarter of the state's land mass, nearly 75% of the state's population lives in and around the I-35 corridor. So what we'll see is a lot of migration to the state of Texas, our population booming, and as I mentioned, that will continue to create a struggle between agricultural use, industrial use, and municipal use of water. I thought it was interesting, I read recently that even in and around the capital and around East Texas, where there's a lot of rice farming down south of Austin, in the paper there recently, it said that rice farmers were supplied enough water to supply Los Angeles for an entire year. So Los Angeles has 9.8 million people, but that's the same amount of water that was being released out of the Highland Lakes to aid the rice farmers. So people hear that and they get uptight, but it's a different type of use and it's not unnecessary, but it's one of those things that we will continually see struggles between municipal, ag, and industrial users. El Nino's record-busting year that we expected hasn't been quite as good, and so I think we should prepare, and I'm sure you heard from Dr. Mace and other folks today about what may be forthcoming with respect to weather patterns. We certainly will see cyclical drought conditions in the future, and so we have to be prepared for that. Conservation, especially in the Panhandle of Texas, will still be a prime focal point and will continue to be for a long time. And so other resources such as desalination, certainly of brackish water, of seawater, those will be top priorities. I thought it was interesting with respect to brackish water. You've probably heard this, but there are 2.7 billion acre feet of brackish water in the state's minor and major aquifers across the state. To put that in perspective, the total conservation capacity or water supply for reservoirs monitored by the TWDB or BD is 31.3 million acre feet. So that means there's nearly 90 times as much brackish water in the state of Texas as there is currently in our state's reservoirs if they were all full. Now, not all of that could be used for freshwater supply, but it certainly is a pretty amazing resource when you think about some opportunities there for development. So at a state level, I think we'll see some more continued arguments and debate about the best ways to develop it and produce it and manage it. So those are the types of issues that I think will be at least initially addressed next session. Certainly reading those tea leaves is important. That's why my last point was why should it be important? Why should you pay attention to it? Because I think all of these issues touch and affect the way we operate our economy up in the Panhandle and throughout the entire state of Texas. So thank you for your attention this afternoon. I know I only have 15 minutes and I'm talking fast, but I really do appreciate y'all. I'll be at the back of the room if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much.